Oh my god, I'm really suffering. Oh, man, it's just my skin, man. It's so sore. Too much time in the sun. It's gonna take a few days to feel better. Oh well, no regrets. It didn't feel so ridiculously hot. I was out for quite some time, and it's the first time I've taken off my shirt in a long time, out and about. And we all know it's a heat wave. Whoa, so red, so red. You know what, I'm gonna splash some water on it. Nice cold water. Oh, even just a little bit. God, I might be up again all night, because any sort of like fabric touching me on the skin where it's sensitive now, where it's sore, I can't deal with it. It hurts. So I think I'm gonna have to try and stay up all night. Can't wear a shirt, can't lie down. That's fine. I can do it. I've done it before. I'll tire myself out until I can't stop myself from falling asleep. That's what I'll do. This food I made before was pretty good. It's vegetable. No, sorry, it's bean. Wait, what is it? It's a bean chili with rice and lentils. Man, it's good. Good vegetarian food can be really good. Beans are good. Tomato is good. The rice is really good. If anything, I should have made more rice to go with it. I had a lot of rice to go with it, but the rice to chili ratio, when it's perfect, is unbeatable. I think next time I'll use a little bit less chili powder. Still haven't figured out how to get the amount of chili powder exactly right. Best method would be to take exact measurements of everything. I always do it by eye, which means it's not really exact enough. Anyway, this video is probably going to be called the shirtless vlog, because I'm probably going to be shirtless for the whole thing because of this damn sunburn. Oh well, you've seen what I'm eating, now here's what I'm drinking. I've got these at the moment, Vimto Endurance. Little tablets. Plop it into a cup. Fill it up with water. Just makes like a little Vimto hydration drink. Try not to drink too many of these, because if you have too many... Sorry, the sound of the tap there was a bit too loud. If you have too many of these hydration drinks, you do sometimes end up with arse vomit, otherwise known as diarrhea. Isn't it good to say the word diarrhea right before you take a bite of it, right before you eat a spoonful of food? You do it to yourself, you do. And that's what really hurts. You do it to yourself, just you and no one else. Anyway, I didn't really introduce myself in this vlog. I didn't really say hello. Hi, if you're new here, I'm James. This is my vlog channel. This is where I just make my daily life content. I'm also on TikTok. If you want to go over to my TikTok, you can see my drum content, mostly on the lives. and I do some random videos on the TikTok. I need to try and not shake my legs as much, otherwise this shot will shake a lot. You know what, put the camera down there, that's a lot better. And I can shake my legs as much as I want. I've been shaking all the time recently. Not like, not unintentionally, but it's just been like a reflex where I just want to keep moving my leg. I guess it's a bit of restless leg syndrome, something like that. Anyway, I'll show you what I've been doing on TikTok. I sit here and I get my practice pad and then I basically stick on some music. And I basically just do that. I can't do it with the music on here on YouTube because you're not allowed to play copyrighted music in your videos, unfortunately. But for whatever reason, you can do it on TikTok. I don't really understand why that is, but it just is the way it is. TikTok's a bit like the Wild West. I mean, in the early days of YouTube, you used to be able to use copyrighted music and it was fine, you know? And then eventually they brought in a rule where that wasn't allowed. I remember at the time thinking that kind of sucked because it kind of ruined some people's vlogs because some people would they'd splice in sort of like popular culture sort of things. So, you know, like songs into their vlogs that would make it funny and they'd add a bit of humour to things. But then they brought in the copyright thing. It kind of ruined it a little bit, sadly. But well, c'est la vie. Those days are gone. Those were the good old days of YouTube. You know, there's probably loads of things about YouTube that's way, 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 way better now. In fact, there definitely is. Especially the video quality. I remember what the video quality used to be like. Oh my god. You know, the whole what's this, filmed on a potato? Like in the beginnings of YouTube, everything was filmed on a potato. Literally everything. Anyway, I'm waiting for my phone to charge for a little bit at the moment, so I'm going to keep reading my book that I'm reading at the moment. It's this one, Jim Morrison. I'm still going through it. I sort of gave up on it at one point, and I started thinking I don't really like this book, but then I tried it again and I actually started to really like it again. So here's what I'm up to. During all this, Jimmy was living with Ray and Dorothy, but he was also sleeping around, sometimes on Dennis's roof, or at Felix's, or on Carol Winter's couch, or with some other chick. Friends could see that Jimmy compartmentalized his life, keeping his circles of friends separate from and sometimes unknown to each other. To some, he spoke only in a kind of hoarse whisper, like Brian Jones. Jim had a humongous secret life, his UCLA friend and longtime colleague Paul Ferrara said of him. Often the people who assumed they were closest to him had little idea of his other shadowy associations. For the rest of his life, Jim maintained a series of bolt holes, places where he could stash himself and hide from responsibilities and his old lady. Jim Morrison was a guy who would just disappear. Jimmy kept up with things in his way. He read magazines like Newsweek and Downbeat. He read and reread Norman Mailer's new novel An American Dream, which was extremely influential on his immediate work. American Dream chapters like A Vision in the Desert and The Lion and the Serpent soon echoed in Jim's lyrics. The novel's powerful depiction of anal intercourse between the hero and his wife's maid might have awakened or validated Jimmy's own developing erotic tastes. He also spent hours at the movies. Goddard's new film, Contempt, was shown in Los Angeles that fall, and the film is mentioned in surviving Morrison notebooks. Considered by some the greatest work of Western art in any medium since World War II, Contempt stars Brigitte Bardot, in a heartbreaking melange of existential soap opera and movie history. Filmed on the Isle of Capri, Jimmy raved about co-star Jack Palance's performance as a predatory American film producer. He took doses of LSD almost every day, or at least that was what he told people. He had a huge stash of Owlsley Stanley's early product, White Lightning acid, that looked like aspirin tablets. So Jimmy was wildly unpredictable at all times. He'd go out to a cafe in Venice and return to Ray's pad with some stranger who was tripping his brains out. Jimmy then tried to mindfuck the stranger, putting on a Chet Baker side and flipping the light switches on and off until the person had to get up and leave. I was just testing him, Jimmy told perplexed Densmore. Jimmy was starting to scare John, who was driving Jimmy around. John took him one evening to a girl's house in Beverly Hills. Joanna White was one of several attractive UCLA art students who let Jimmy use their bathrooms, sleep on their couches, and borrow their cars. John dropped him off at her apartment and went to get some apple juice. When he returned, he found Jim twisting Joanna's arm behind her back in the kitchen, whispering violent threats in her ear while popping open the buttons of her shirt with a carving knife. Jimmy stopped when John walked in. Just having a little fun, Jimmy said with a smirk as he released the horrified girl's arm. John left quickly in shock. The thought, I'm in a band with a psychotic, ran through Densmore's mind over and over again. Working with Morrison was traumatic for Densmore from the beginning. He was afraid of Jimmy, but later wrote that he knew that this band was his only ticket out of his family. There was also a car wreck fascination with what this guy might pull next. John Densmore developed a persistent skin rash on his legs when he met Jim, an anxiety dermatitis that only went away when Jim died. The Doors rehearsed at Hank Olguin's house 3 times a week for about a month, until the noise got too much for the neighbours and the police arrived and shut down the music. At one low-energy band meeting, the Doors even talked about quitting. Instead, they were allowed to set up their gear in the Krieger's suburban rec room, which had a piano. The fresh air and bourgeois comfort of the Palisades proved good for the Doors as they learned to mesh with themselves. According to Densmore, one day in December, Jimmy announced, "We need more material." Everyone, he ordered, should go home and try writing a new song for the next rehearsal. Use elemental imagery instead of specifics: earth, air, fire, and water. 2 days later, when the Doors got together, Jim asked if anyone had tried to write a new song. I wrote one, Robbie said. It came out okay. What's it called? Ray asked. Light My Fire, Robbie replied. Chapel of Extreme Experience. 4 years later, Jim told Rolling Stone's Jerry Hopkins, "So what we got was an acetate demo and we had 3 copies pressed right. I took them around everywhere I could possibly think of. Going to the record companies, I hit most of them. Just going in the door and telling the secretary what I wanted, the reception game. Sometimes they'd say, leave your number, but then at Columbia they became interested. I gave the demo to a girl named Joan Wilson, who worked for the head of talent research and development. She called me a few days later at Felix's house. The notation Jim Morrison, PH 3848489, was scrawled in Jim's handwriting on the demo sleeve and said he'd like to talk to us. We got a contract with Columbia for 6 months. Having that contract was kind of an incentive for us to stay together. No one was more shocked than the Doors when they got a record deal from Columbia Records, the recording arm of the legendary Columbia Broadcasting System and the home of Dylan and the Byrds, but it was also the home of Barbra Streisand, Ray Conniff and Simon and Garfunkel, and seemed a no-chance long shot to Jim and Ray when they infiltrated Columbia's offices at Sunset and Gower trying to get their demo played. But then the intensely persuasive, blue-eyed, often barefoot and increasingly godlike Jim Morrison connected with Joan Wilson, secretary to Columbia executive Billy James. Joan got them in to see her boss. Billy James had been Bob Dylan's Columbia publicist in New York. James had first broken the story of Dylan's real name being Robert Zimmerman. Sent to Hollywood to beef up the label's presence there, James worked with the Byrds and helped steer their so far stellar career. While the Doors were shopping their demo, a photo of James had appeared in Billboard. His beatnik goatee gave him instant cred with Jimmy and Ray. So they borrowed Dorothy's yellow VW Bug and drove to Columbia. With a mandate to sign new LA bands, Billy James likes what he heard in the Doors demo, a fusion of interesting poetic ideas with blatantly tuneful dreams of pop success. The Doors, he reasoned, could be a perfect example of a subtle transformation that the whole pop scene was undergoing in California. This transformation was unconsciously evolving through Bob Dylan, who had outraged the sclerotic folk music establishment by appearing at July's Newport Folk Festival, playing an electric guitar with members of the Butterfield Band. In the autumn of 1965, he began touring with Levin and the Hawks, the Canadian rock and roll group that later became the band. All that season, Dylan and the Hawks moved around North America playing Dylan's post-beat surreal mod music, getting booed in many places when Dylan began playing his new Stones-influenced rock music. A defining moment in that tour happened when Dylan and band played the Community Theatre in Berkeley in December, and the stars of the San Francisco poetry scene arrived to do Dylan homage. Allen Ginsberg, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and Michael McClure were photographed outside the stage door with Dylan, conferring a kind of beatitude on the voice of his generation. Jimmy didn't go to any of the concerts that Dylan played in LA that December, but a girl Jimmy knew went to Santa Monica Civic Auditorium show and then was grilled about it afterwards by Jimmy in an almost third-degree tone. What did Dylan wear? What did he sing? What was the band like? Could you hear the words? What were the vibes like? Was everyone high? Jimmy also heard about the nights at Jim McGuinn's house in Laurel Canyon. Bob Dylan was up there jamming with Allen Ginsberg, who had lately gotten Indian religion and transformed himself into a genial Hindu guru. McGuinn recalled, San Francisco thought they had cornered hipness and creativity, but it wasn't the whole truth. Hollywood had a bad name for its slickness and superficiality, but there was actually an integrity to some of the stuff that was going on. It was a real kick after the Byrds got to #1 with Mr. Tambourine Man. Dylan would come to the house with Allen Ginsberg and we'd all sit around the floor chanting. He, Ginsberg, didn't sing very well, but he was really into it. Hanging with Dylan and the Byrds, chanting sutras with finger cymbals and a little harmonium. Ginsberg conferred beat cred on the rock and roll scene, making it okay to be in chilled out LA, rather than San Francisco where the vice cops had just shut down the Beard. Michael McClure's surreal play in which Billy the Kid and Jean Harlow hook up in a mythical blue heaven. Bob Dylan did 4 sold-out concerts in Southern California and no one booed at any of them. Who digs Los Angeles is Los Angeles, Ginsberg wrote. Jimmy and Ginsberg ran into each other around this time, late 1965, at Pickwick Books on Hollywood Boulevard. Jimmy told Allen he was a poet too. Allen, bushy beard and unusually direct, blatantly cruised Jim, but Jim wasn't interested. Allen told Jimmy that he'd been thrown out of both Cuba and Czechoslovakia that year by communist governments afraid he would spread perversion and dissent. Billy James called in the Doors for a meeting. A rumour at Columbia Records in New York put Bob Dylan in James's LA office when the Doors acetate got played. When Dylan heard Moonlight Drive with its imagery of swimming and loving to the death, he supposedly told James, sign that fucking band, man. Jim and Ray went to see Billy James. Ray was stoned and started to giggle when he realised James probably was too. Jim leaned over and murmured, shut up, Ray. Densmore, says James, discussed having his wife manage the band if he signed them to CBS. Billy James told them he loved their demo but they needed a producer. Then he offered the Doors a no-money option deal from Columbia that gave them 6 months to write an album's worth of songs good enough to interest one of the label's in-house producers to make a record with them. The 4 Doors signed this contract in October 1965. Within the band, prompted by Jim, they decided that everything would be split 4 ways and shared equally. A record deal with Bob Dylan's label. Temporarily, the Doors were over the moon. Robbie even quit the Clouds, the other band he was jamming with. Unable to bet on the Doors financially, James gave them their unmistakable sound instead. Columbia, he told them, had just bought the English instrument maker Vox, whose US factory was out in the San Fernando Valley. From Vox, the Doors got new Super Beetle amplifiers and the famous Vox Continental electric organ that had anchored core British invasion bands like the Animals and the Dave Clark Five. The black and white keys were reversed on the Continental and it had two aluminium Z-shaped stands. Mostly it was loud, plugged into a guitar amp and cranked up to 10. The Vox Continental sounded huge. It would give the Doors a churchy come carnivalesque sound that made their concerts seem like a doomy chapel of extreme experience. Desert Vision. October 1965, Ray Manzarek found a new rehearsal room in a beach house at the corner of North Star and Speedway in Venice, just north of the Marina Channel. It was a classic California surf shack with coloured glass in the window panels and a knotty pine interior. The 30-foot glass front of the house looked directly onto the beach. With their new organ and amplifiers, the Doors could now plug in and begin playing electric rehearsals like a real rock and roll band. Jimmy would come in with a new song written on a crumpled paper napkin and sing the words, while the band helped him figure out the melody and arrangement. Soul Kitchen, inspired by Olivia's soul food restaurant, happened that way and emerged in its powerful form during the course of a single evening rehearsal. This was when Ray knew his vision would come true. I said to Jim, this is it, we're going to make it, we're going to make great music and people are going to love it. Ray and Dorothy moved into the house's bedroom and Ray made the other guys in the band split the rent with him. John objected to this, which made Ray describe him later as mean and vindictive. To Ray's consternation, Jimmy Morrison moved in with Felix Venable and Phil Oleno in Venice and proceeded to embark on an exhausting psychedelic binge of LSD, dangerous plant euphorics like belladonna and Jimson weed, plus mass quantities of alcohol. Under Felix's thumb, Jimmy displayed an ugly side Ray had never seen before. Drunk, Jimmy would reel through multiple personae that included Jimbo the racist frat boy, the Dylan Thomas romantic Celt, the village idiot Norman Mailer, the bloated biker, the beat poet, and the southern gent. Ray tried to express some concern when Jimmy told him he was going to stay with Felix, but Jimmy just laughed at him. Soon, Jim, Felix, and Phil got so crazy that it affected the band, with Jimmy missing rehearsals because he was tripping, high, drunk, or all three. But this view of Jim as drugged out reprobate has to balance with the stark reality of the high quality of work he was producing. The sheer funky coolness of the Soul Kitchen lyrics could only have come from a poet comfortably in control of his cadences and imagery. The way that the idea of the secret alphabet blended into the admonition, learn to forget, had an evocative and hypnotic quality that was instantly at the top of rock's lyrical game. As memorable as anything contemporary by the Beatles, Stones, or even Bob Dylan. At the same time, he seemed to be a premature acid casualty. Jim Morrison was crafting riveting poetic imagery, the glittering stuff of the Doors' first two albums, that would penetrate his generation's consciousness and echo down through the decades. Jim finished Crystal Ship around that time, according to John Densmore, as he was breaking up with an early girlfriend, possibly Mary Werbelow. They had to make some money now, which meant infiltrating the music clubs on the Strip. As boho film grads, Jimmy and Ray had looked down on this scene, oriented towards squares, tourists, and teeny boppers from the valley. But they were all broke, and the bars were the only source of steady employment for a baby band like the Doors. In early November 1965, they auditioned at the Galaxy and were told to get a bass player or people wouldn't dance. At Bidolitos, a non-union rock club on the eastern end of Sunset where new bands could sometimes break in, they were rejected several times for being too weird and not knowing satisfaction. Bill Gazzari wouldn't even let Jim into his club to audition because he was barefoot. This went on for a while. Gazzari recalled, "One day Jim said, 'Bill, can we come in now?' I leaned over the counter and he had one shoe on. He didn't have a shoe on the other foot. I said, 'Did you lose a shoe?' Jim said, 'No, I found one so I could get in.' Without Jim present, the Doors auditioned a couple of bass players, which made them sound like the Animals, but nobody clicked. The Doors were already this humidly insular four-piece band that seemingly had no room for another musician in the mix. Then, as the Doors were failing an audition at a club in Westchester where the Turtles were the house band, Ray noticed their stage gear included a Fender Rhodes keyboard bass sitting on top of a Vox Continental organ, like the one he used. It had 32 notes and was played left-handed, boogie-woogie style. Ray remembered, I switched on the amplifier, played the thing, and realised what it was. I said, this is it, we have found our bass player. The next day at Wallach's Music City, they learned they had nowhere near the $250 price of the keyboard bass. But 3 days later, Robbie walked into the sunroom of the beach house with a brand new keyboard bass still in its box. Stu Krieger had written a check and told his son that if they made Light My Fire a hit record, the Doors wouldn't have to pay him back. The first rehearsal with the bass was epochal. John started playing with a little more snap with a bass line under him, and Jim grabbed the single maraca he liked to shake and danced around the room like a spastic dervish. The Doors had never sounded so good before. We're ready to take on the Stones now, Ray announced to the band with typical grandiosity. Both John and Robbie had been jamming with other bands all this time, and Ray now asked them to quit and devote their full energies to the Doors, and I did finally, Densmore says. I could see that Jim was really special. The Doors played several gigs around town that fall, including frat parties, a wedding and a dance at Union Hall. Ray still did most of the singing, with Jimmy's back turned to the audience as he faced his band in a four-squared circle while he slowly grew accustomed to performing music. Gloria Money and Bo Diddley's Who Do You Love were huge jams for the early Doors. On December the 10th, the Doors played as an augmented quartet at UCLA Film School's Royce Hall screenings of the previous year's best student films. They set up off stage and provided a live soundtrack as Ray Manzarek's Who I Am and Where I Live was shown. Ray played flute, Robbie played guitar, and Jimmy, John Densmore, and assorted girlfriends played drums, rattles, and tambourines. Felix Venable's short film Les Anges Dormants was also screened. On New Year's Eve, they played at the home of some friends of the Kriegers, where they took requests for popular songs of the day, asked to play Ticket to Ride and Satisfaction. Jimmy asked if the guests thought the Doors were a jukebox. Someone gave him a quarter, which he threw high in the air, caught in his mouth, and swallowed. If you are new here to my YouTube channel, I do read books fairly often. Anyway, despite what I said earlier about not lying down, about trying to stay up, I'm going to go lie down.